Good morning. So I am doing a video because I am presently out of town visiting my in-laws in the South, which is in and of itself a terrifying place to be. Prayers up that I can survive. Sorry, Sarah. But the South's kind of the worst. Seems like a reasonable assumption. Yeah, they're the worst. But I wanted to make sure that we could continue our series because I kind of left you guys on a cliffhanger last week. We didn't get very far. Class was kind of goofy, which was totally kosher because we had a whole bunch of newbies. Hudson Wyatt joined us for the first time last week, as well as Amber, who was able to join us as well. So to all of you who are there, hello. Brennan, if you are there and this is your first time, welcome. If not, sorry, I just called you out, dog, but it do be how it do be. Let's jump into our class this morning on the idea of what exactly happened on the cross and specifically how the cross represents the fulfillment of a conflict narrative, a story of fighting that dates all the way back to the beginning in Genesis chapter 1. Last week, lightning round review, we talked about this. In Revelation chapter 12, there seemingly is a story in which Satan attempts a rebellion against God. God sends Michael, his angel, his number one angelic baddie, to go take care of business, and he does against Satan. Quickly, Michael wins the war. This is in Revelation chapter 12, starting in verse 9, and Satan is able to... Michael is able to overpower Satan and all the demonic forces, and he casts out the ancient dragon from heaven. Because he was no longer welcome in heaven, he did find a home on earth and began to ransack and ravage humanity. That makes sense when you look back in Genesis chapter 3. All the way back in the beginning of the Bible, the first book, we see the creation story, God creating the heavens and the earth. In that creation story, however you view it, if you view it literally or if you're a theistic evolutionist, doesn't really matter. You're entitled to your opinions on that. But however you view the creation story, it all starts with God standing over a broken and battered battlefield. Genesis chapter 1 verse 2 starts the story of the Spirit of God moving over the waters. Now the waters in the ancient texts, the Old Testament, we see that the water always represents violence and destruction. It represents chaos and disorder. Not only that, but then God goes on to describe the world that he sees. He's standing over the chaotic and violent waters, and in that he sees a battlefield that was rendered void, desolate. It was destroyed. It was broken. Perhaps it was destroyed and broken because of the fight with Satan. Perhaps it was destroyed and broken because we're not the first earth God tried to make. We don't know. What we do know is this. God stood upon this broken and battered land of violence and chaos, and he recreated it into the beautiful, organized, and stunning world that we have today. Thus begins the story of conflict between God and creation. God attempts to right the craziness, but Satan, after getting cast out of heaven, comes to earth. And he tries to break God's beautiful creation. And he starts where I think we all should start. He starts with the biggest and best thing God made, which is us. We, the humankind, was the first target of Satan's conquest of God's creation. So Satan comes after being cast out into the Garden of Eden, and he finds Eve, and in Genesis chapter 3, he tempts her. And in short order, her and Adam both surrender the power they had and gave it over to Satan. That means God, who made the world, took the brokenness, took the violence and the chaos and made something beautiful, gave it over to humanity, and we, in turn, gave the world back over to Satan. God made something beautiful out of the chaos. Satan made the beautiful chaotic. And then we came along and gave it all back to the evil one. It's kind of a tragic story, but a cycle that would continue. In fact, a cycle that the entire Bible shows over and over and over again. Throughout the Old Testament, the story is the same. God walks into a broken situation and he makes it good only for a combination of us and Satan to make it bad again. Around and around the story goes, kind of like a cosmic ping pong game between God and Satan. God making the ugly beautiful, only for Satan to make the beautiful ugly again. And in the middle of this crosshairs, this match between God and Satan, we are the ping pong ball that keeps getting knocked back and forth senseless throughout time. Frankly, it wasn't a sustainable model. God wanted a beautiful and awesome creation that was going to be able to sustain and survive regardless of all that was put against it. But at this rate, it wasn't going to last. The ping pong ball had been dented and damaged by so many epic spikes between God and Satan through the constant battering back and forth between beauty and chaos. And in the middle of it, God realized that we were going to crack under the pressure of this fight between good and evil. Humanity was going to fail in the conflict between Satan and God. Not only that, but we see it almost happen. In Genesis chapter 7, a very famous story, the chaotic fight between good and evil became so great that evil almost won. We see that all of humanity, all of the creation had turned evil and chaotic again. And a flood happened because of it. At the conclusion of the flood, though, God was able to do what God always does. He stood over the waters, the representation of violence and chaos. Remember, waters always equal violence and chaos, death and destruction. God stood over the waters that destroyed the whole world. And once again, in Genesis chapter 8, he recreated. That was the closest we ever came to losing our fight against evil. That was the closest God ever came to his creation project being broken. You can imagine that as God is sitting there after the flood in Genesis 8, looking out across the broken world, the world that once was so beautiful, that he determined a new plan, a way to win once and for all, a way that would guarantee his ultimate victory, punch Satan in his stupid dragon face, and once and for all declare that God has won and that his creation is safe. So, that is where we will begin today. To help set the stage for the dire nature of what we are and where we are, let's make sure that we understand the world that was around in the time of Jesus. Remember, the ping pong game had been going on now for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And God knew he needed an ultimate plan once and for all to win his fight against Satan. And so he'd been planning Jesus for quite some time, sending Jesus on earth. But in the time of Christ, we need to understand how truly terrifying the situation was in the eyes of God, and how close it resembled that world that led to the flood. The world had fallen into disarray and disorder, the beauty of God's creation undone. So I have a couple of verses. I'm going to write them on the board here. And then you will read them, pause me and read them, and then come back to me in just a moment. Okay. I don't know if you guys will be able to see it. I'll keep it on the board. I'll define these as reading 1. We're going to have someone read 1 John 5:19. Someone else will read 2 Corinthians 4:4. Someone else will read Ephesians 2:2. Someone else will read John 12:31. Someone else will read Luke 4, 5, and 6. So, and I know you probably can't see it on the video, but it will be on the board if you just look over there. Whoever is proctoring this class, I believe it's either going to be Casey or Sarah, or a combination of the two. If you guys wouldn't mind divvying out those readings, 1 John 5:19, 2 Corinthians 4:4, Ephesians 2:2, John 12:31, and Luke 4, 5, and 6. We will pause me, read, come back to me. Go ahead and pause. I'm presuming that was enough time for you to read these passages. Well, not really, but you have a pause button. That makes it easier. So let's break these passages down. These passages reveal what I talked about just a moment ago, that after creation and after we sinned, we gave the power of the creation over to Satan, putting Satan on the throne that we were supposed to be sitting on, the throne that ultimately God gave us. To start with this 1 John 5:19 passage, the whole world lies in the power of the evil one is self-explanatory. This world that we live in is no longer ours, and it's no longer God's. In the time of Jesus, as he was walking into the earth, he was walking into enemy territory. The world that he created by his power and by his might no longer belonged to him. Therefore, when Jesus came out of Mary's womb and was beholding the world for the first time, he was beholding an enemy territory, a territory that needed to be won back because it was no longer his. Jesus on earth was actually a giant rescue mission. It was a special operation of God sending his best operative into enemy territory in order to beat back Satan and take back the world once and for all. This was the ultimate objective and primary motivation of God. But that wasn't the only passage you read. Not only is the whole world under the power of the evil one, but also we see that he's the God of this world. Again, a title showing that he has beaten out us as rulers of God's creation. And he's the ruler of the power of the air. He is the prince of this age. And he has all the kingdoms of the world at his disposal. That Luke chapter 4 passage to me is probably the most fascinating of all the ones you read. Because in that Luke chapter 4 passage, Jesus is being tempted by Satan. And what Satan says is, I can give you everything in the world, all of the kingdoms of the world, every nation on earth, I can give you. But notice Jesus doesn't correct him. Jesus' response isn't, whoa, you don't have that kind of power, Satan. Actually, some of these kingdoms are mine. No. What does he say? I ain't doing it. But he never denies Satan's power to give it to him. As an aside, just letting you think about this for a moment, if it's true that every kingdom under the sun on earth belongs to Satan, that means none of them belong to God. Meaning, every country on earth, including ours, is under the power of the evil one. As you get older, you're going to find that a lot of people get really frustrated with the state of the world and really panicked and angry and disappointed and all this stuff. And though I understand it, the reality is every nation, including America, is being run by some degree by Satan because they're under his control. So let's not get too surprised when our country continually does dumb things, right? Because the whole world is under the power of the evil one. And every nation on earth is his. So, surprise, they all kind of suck evenly. Back to class. So, we have this idea, this picture being painted that Jesus is walking into this territory that once he made, but now Satan runs. And he has to figure out a way to undo all the crap that Satan did. Which leads us to Jesus' secret mission as God's number one operative, as his SEAL Team 6, if you will. His pacifistic, non-violent SEAL Team 6. I realize this analogy is working less and less the further I go along with it, but here we are. I'm going to ask you to read a couple more passages. Mark chapter 3, verse 27. Luke chapter 4, verse 18. 1 John 3, 8. And Hebrews chapter 2, verse 14. Again, these are under reading 2 on the board. You guys should be able to see that, not in the video, but in real life, because IRL, it's right there. IRL. What the heck? I just get trapped in Sword Art Online. Yeah, so go ahead and read these passages. Give me a pause. Then we'll pop back in and observe it once more. All right, dope. Let's jump back in. So, these passages all reveal something similar. We often believe that Jesus came as some sort of teacher. We believe that what he did is he came in order to reveal to us truths, to speak beautiful magic words, and to speak those Christian thoughts that are just go so golly gee williker good. And though that's part of it, Jesus actually came with a much more militaristic intent in mind. He came to directly end the conflict between Satan and God. He came to end the war that had plunged the earth into chaos for so long. He came, in short, to tie up the strong man, Satan, to free those that he had in his captive, to undo the power of death and destroy the one who held it, and to undo the works of the devil once and for all. These passages reveal that Jesus' mission is far less about spiritual mumbo jumbo than it is actually making a difference in the creation he had always been fighting for. Excuse me. Again, God's story, the Bible, from the very beginning, is all about God's desire to win back his creation. Satan did done steal it. God did done want to steal it back. It's the whole point. That's precisely what he's going through. So, why does it look like there is a... Oh, never mind. On my screen it looks like a no smoking symbol. It's actually just the zoom button. I'm blind and dumb. So, God came in order to win the war against Satan, to beat the snot out of Satan, and to steal back all of those that Satan had unlawfully detained. All the ones he had captured and kidnapped, including us. So, we're almost done. Well, I'm almost done. There's going to be some discussion questions at the end that you all will deal with and have to go through. Give me a second. Got to hydramerate. Okay. Whew. I'm out of breath. I don't know why, but I always talk faster on the videos than I do in real life. It's because I just want to get through this because, man, it's super weird trying to teach to nobody. Like, usually you guys have, like, energy. You guys are making faces. Henry's making off-the-wall comments. Something about how, I don't know, whatever dumb take he's making right now. Or Graydon's in the back speaking his heresy that LeBron James isn't the best basketball player of all time, that he's 25th all time, which is just, dude, like, okay, we're not getting off on this, but, like, you're just wrong. Like, he's top 10 in assists, points, wins, championships, steals, blocks, like, every major statistical category. Dude's the best of all time. You're an idiot, Graydon. If you're here, I love you, but also you're dead wrong. Anyway, back to Jesus. Why we're all here in the first place. Not for Graydon's heresies or Henry's terrible Star Wars takes. Jesus. So Jesus comes, and he is here in order to liberate all of Satan's badness that he has done to the universe. But why this is relevant is because the cross becomes the center battlefield of all of Scripture. For a long time, the battlefield was Israel, it was Egypt, it was the Canaanite lands, it was Midian, it was Elijah in the wilderness, but in no point did we really fully express the battle that we see that happens on the cross. Jesus fighting his best against Satan in a way that Satan could not possibly comprehend. So, one of the last times I'll make you read, I want us to understand the true power of what happened on the cross. I want us to understand truly what happened when Jesus died. And I want us to understand truly the power and gravity of the cross as the center of the Bible. The creational battle that has taken place all the way from Genesis chapter 1, verse 2. We're talking 2 verses into this thing, all the way through to the cross. A singular battle, centrally defining the problems that we all have to deal with, and the things that come with it. So, we're going to fire off reading list numero tres. Reading 3. Okay. What are we doing here? Oh. 1 Corinthians 15. 24, 28, and Ephesians chapter 1, verse 20 through 22. Go ahead and pause, read those. I will be jamming to some lo-fi. Go ahead and pause me. I'm actually going to try a bashful pose. Okay. So here we are, with both of these powers defining God's victory and how the cross revealed something. I want us to really talk about this 1 Corinthians passage for just a moment, because I think there's something really stunning in it. Then comes the end, when he hands over the kingdom to God the Father, when he has brought to an end all rule and all authority and all power. Listen to what he's saying here. The cross reveals the ultimate victory over all authority, all power, and all rule. He is going to take it all back. He's going to bring it all under his feet, and ultimately he's going to turn around, and once Jesus steals the throne out from underneath Satan, he's going to turn and hand it back to God the Father. For he must reign until he has put all his enemies under his feet. There is going to come an ultimate victorious moment in which God is going to win in the end. And it's all because of the cross. It's all because Jesus was willing to die. And he has destroyed everything, including even the concept of death. And when all things, verse 28, are subjected to him, then the Son himself will be subjected to the one who subjected everything to him, so that God may be all in all. God is going to win, ultimately, decisively, and incredibly, and Jesus will be all in all. Now, for those of you who were in our Hell series, and for those of you who were in our Salvation series a couple of months ago, this is a very important verse for whatever your view of hell is. As a reminder, always be keeping an eye out to how the Bible changes, how your theology changes your interpretation of some scriptures. For Christ to be all in all, what does that mean? For God to ultimately destroy the concept of death, what does that mean? This passage stands as one of the biggest contradictions and fights against the classical view of hell. The idea that God sends people to hell forever, and they suffer in agony or whatever. This passage seemingly says that that's not a viable option, because God will be all in all, and that he will ultimately destroy the concept of death. There will be no more death ever again. If you believe in annihilationism, this passage and this idea of Jesus having a victory over Satan that destroys death and brings an end to all else makes sense, because in your view of hell, annihilationism, ultimately everyone who rejects God will just lose their life once and for all. Poof, gone forever. For those of you who believe in universalism, this passage is very, very important, because the universalists believe, that God will bring all things together and bring it to Christ, setting it under his feet and allowing him to reign supreme forever. No more death, no more dying. Whichever your view of hell is, the victory of Jesus on the cross matters greatly, because it achieved that. It achieved the ability for God to win. These victory conditions are very, very important. In fact, in just a moment, it's going to be your number one discussion question. If I can find where I put the marker, it's in my pocket. I'm a dummy. Questions. We'll go here. Your discussion question number one is going to be answering that. We'll get to it in just a moment. Question one. What do we think about God's victory conditions? I'm going to put that as VC, victory conditions, here in Ephesians and in 1 Corinthians. What are we going to do with those? Second thing I'd like us to consider. In that second passage, in Ephesians chapter 1, in Ephesians chapter 1, verses 20 through 22, we see again that we have this idea of Jesus being named over all authority and all ruleship because of the cross. See, this is very important. This idea is very, very important, because whatever Jesus did on the cross, however it flows and functions, it concludes the conflict, liberating all things, including even those who are dead. So, let's talk a little bit about what happened on the cross. We're going to really kind of nail this down next week, but we see here what we set up. Last week we talked about how conflict is from the very beginning, and how the whole story of the Bible is a story of conflict between good and evil. Today we broke that down a little bit more, talking about how the world that Jesus stepped into had belonged to Satan for quite some time, and how Jesus was God's biggest mission, surprise attack, to liberate us from his grasp and to save all of us from the destruction of Satan. We're going to conclude here with our third or fourth set of reading, and we'll call it a day. We're going to read Colossians chapter 2, verse 14. We are going to read Matthew chapter 20, verse 28. We are going to read Mark chapter 10, verse 45. And we are going to read 1 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 6. So, pause me and read those. Okay. These four passages, our last reading, sets us up nicely for what we're going to finish up on next Sunday, which is examining the cross in this battlefield. We've established that it is the battlefield. Now we have to figure out what exactly happened. The language that's frequently used in the New Testament is the word ransom. The ransom. Now, in our modern context, ransom is usually a kidnapping term, right? That we have been taken hostage, and a hostage taker is demanding a certain amount of money to release the prisoners that they have captured. And though that's fine, that's actually not the biblical model. And in the ancient world, in ancient Rome, there was a different understanding of this word translated ransom. See, a ransom in that time and in that place was actually a ransom from an executioner or a judge. Let me put it like this. For those of you who are new and you don't know this, Britta murders someone every Tuesday. It's kind of her favorite pastime. It's called Transgressions Tuesday, and she has become quite skillful at it. In fact, if you ever need someone dead and discreetly to disappear on a Tuesday, she's your gal. But let's say a judge discovers that Britta has in fact finally executed her murder of me. And I am dead, and she thinks she's gotten away from it, but because of this video in which I prophesy it, save it, lawyers, this is the proof, that she is going to kill me, because of this video, she gets caught. In the ancient world, in ancient Rome, she would be put into prison, and there would be something called a ransom. A ransom could be paid to an executioner to forego the execution. Now, that often meant there were still punishments she had to endure, but at least she'd be free from the hands of the executioner. This word ransom also brings with it another connotation of being captured in battle. I am fighting the Persians. And I, the pacifist, for whatever reason, gets thrown into the front lines, and I surrender almost immediately because I am not going to fight, and I get thrown into a Persian prison. A ransom is the amount of money that Rome is willing to pay to free me from that prison. In both examples of this word, we see the same idea. We are experiencing a consequence or a punishment, and we get freed from it. It gets bought from us. The New Testament sets up that Christ was a ransom on the cross. What exactly does it mean that Christ was a ransom on the cross? That's going to be your second discussion question. What does it mean that Christ was a ransom for us? See, when we talk in the church, we often miss this idea of Jesus being the ransom. Sure, we talk about it a lot, but it's not a central element of the cross, which is dumb because it definitely should be, because Jesus is the ransom, is the whole reason he came to the cross. In fact, Jesus being our ransom is what makes the cross a smashing success and victory over the whole creational conflict. I'm going to ask you one last question to consider here. I'm going to ask you to try to predict. How did the cross defeat Satan? It's going to be your last discussion question you'll have after this video. How did the cross defeat Satan? Let me end here. Just a quick thought. The story of the Bible is a story of a conflict that begins all the way back in Genesis chapter 1, verse 2, and runs until the end of time. And it won't actually fully be over until Jesus comes in victory once more, when he comes back to earth. The cross, however, stands as the guarantor of that victory. It's like that weird point of time in World War II. After the successful invasions of Normandy in D-Day, it was all but guaranteed that now that the Americans had a foothold in the continental Europe, that we were going to win. Russia was pushing in on one side, we were coming in from the other. It was only a matter of time before Germany fell. That time in between D-Day and V-Day still was very bloody. A lot of people died in between the moment they realized we were going to win D-Day and the actual conclusion of the war. But that time in between was filled with such hope. That time in between was filled with such joy because though there was still suffering and though there was still combat and though there was still dying, the writing was on the wall. The war had been won. The cross serves as D-Day. The moment in which we as Christians can see ahead and know how the story ends. Evil loses. Creation will be redeemed and restored. And everything will be made whole under the feet of Jesus. But right now we find ourselves still in the struggle against Satan. We find ourselves still in this war. But don't lose hope. Don't give up. Because our victory, it's coming. It's coming in the form and the person of Jesus, who will make all things right and end the story of conflict that the Bible is telling. That's class.